Okay, welcome to another of KUDEN Radio. Daishi Hamiller here from Warrior Concepts. Excuse me. Last episode, we spent a lot of time talking about the idea that a martial arts curriculum should be more than, just a list, right? A list of techniques, a list of kata, a list of skills, right? A list of requirements that you check off on your way from one belt to the next. And instead, I suggested that we should be looking at the curriculum as a map, right? Because the techniques, right? Knowing the techniques, it's not really the destination, right? That's not really where we're aiming. I mean, some people could be, okay? But the techniques are not the destination. Those aren't my words. Those are Hatsumi Sensei's words, okay? Capability is the destination. That's the goal, right? But here's where it creates another question for us. Because if the curriculum is a map, then what does following that map actually look like when we walk into class? Because those aren't necessarily the same thing, right? My student workbooks, right? I showed one last episode. They might say that at any particular level, right? You're responsible for certain kamae, certain strikes and kicks, certain techniques, maybe 2 or 3 particular drills, right? They also tell you something about the capabilities you're supposed to be developing at that stage. I know, I wrote them. but that doesn't mean that I walk into class, open the workbook and say, okay, number 1 on the list, everybody do this one, right? Check. Number 2, check, right? You get the idea, right? Because my job as an instructor isn't merely to cover the curriculum. It's not merely to teach the techniques and skills that are listed for any given level, right? My job is to look at the people standing in front of me and ask, where are these students right now relative to where this map says they're supposed to be going? And then what do they need today that's going to move them closer to that point, to that capability, right? Maybe that's one of the drills listed in their workbook, right? Maybe I need to break that drill down into maybe 3 smaller exercises, right? Maybe I need to bring back something they supposedly learned 2 levels ago because I just saw that it isn't necessarily as solid as they think it is. Or maybe I deliberately show them something from 2 levels ahead, right? Not because they're ready for it, not because we're skipping ahead, but because sometimes the best way to show a student that their today's good enough isn't actually good enough. Okay? The best way to do that may be to let tomorrow's problem expose it for them, right? And there's another layer to this, right, that I want to get into tonight during this episode, right? Because I have heard Western martial arts instructors, specifically within the Bujinkan, say for decades, they have it in their promotional material, they tell students who call them or walk in for a class or whatever, right? We teach exactly the way they teach in Japan. Okay. But I've always thought there was something worth looking at more closely, because there's another important question in there. Right? And to me, that question is, are your Western students, starting from the same place as students in Japan? Both Japanese students and those who have lived there full time for 5 years, 10 years, 20, whatever, right? Do they have the same cultural background or cultural integration? Do they have the same movement habits, right? Do they have the same assumptions about what happens in class versus what they're responsible for and for practicing or researching on their own? They're not the same. Western education, Japanese education systems, and the way people are raised, how they come to see things, right? Do they even have the same understanding of what the teacher is and is not responsible for teaching them? And here's the really interesting part, right? When we go to Japan, whoever's teaching, right? The Japanese master teacher may not fill those gaps for us either. I mean, why would he? If he spent his entire class teaching every cultural, physical, historical, linguistic, and developmental prerequisite, right? The Japanese people just learn from childhood up, right? Not just from going to school, it's just living as a Japanese person, right? If they covered all of those prerequisites that a Western student might be missing, when the hell would we ever get around to learning the Budo stuff? When would he get around to teaching it? Right? So perhaps copying exactly what we saw Sensei do during any particular class isn't necessarily the same thing as understanding why he taught that class the way he did. And more importantly, what he didn't say or teach. Right? And that brings us right back to curriculum. Because there's a difference between knowing what belongs in the art, right? What's part of it, and knowing what belongs on the curriculum. And knowing what any particular group of students need right now in order to actually develop it. And that goes for solo students too. Because solo students, right, if you're training on your own, long distance, right, a lot of the stuff that you're responsible for or that you need to do is taking up, well, not the slack, but taking up some of the responsibilities that most people assume belong to the instructor. Because you don't have one next door, in-house, in your town, whatever. Right? So that's what I want to explore during this episode. Right? We're going to take the map we talked about last week, for those of you who joined me live, right? And we're going to bring it off the page. And we're going to walk it onto the training floor and look at how curriculum becomes lesson planning, drills, repetition, correction, challenge, and ultimately real progress. Okay? Because a great curriculum, just like a map, can show us where we're going. But somebody still has to know how to turn that map into training that actually gets us there. Right? Again, I'm Dashiell Miller, and this is KUDEN Radio. So let's get started.
So, the big question is this. How are self-defense and success-minded people like us, concerned citizens worried about protecting ourselves, our loved ones, and the things we care about from the monsters we know exist in the world? How do we train in a way that gives us the skills, knowledge, and understanding we need without becoming paranoid fighters or killers ourselves, and yet still allows us to be the hero protector the world needs us to be? That's the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Jeffrey Miller, and welcome to KUDEN Radio, real training for real people in a real world.
All right, welcome back. So last episode, apparently we had some technical glitches that weren't resolved between us and the recording. So I didn't see anything on my side. James says he didn't see anything on his side. So I'm assuming that our service that simulcast this stuff was a little glitchy. And so I am going to be re-recording episode 319, just as a admin announcement, right? If you're listening to this farther in my future, well, then you've probably already listened to the corrected 319. I just need a couple of days to take care of that, carve some time out of my already busy schedule and make that happen. But hopefully things weren't too glitchy in the last one for those of you who are on typically on live, and that you were able to kind of ferret out those lessons, right? Do a slight review. I'm not setting it aside. You'll just hear those things as we go along. I have them in my notes to kind of flesh out to make sure that not only we're doing it as a reminder, right? But also for folks who didn't listen to 319, there's maybe a couple of hints that maybe they should. Okay. So anyway, as I said, welcome back. Right. This is KUDEN 320. And tonight we're continuing an exploration that we've been building, right? That we've been going through over the last several episodes, right? But as I said in the opening, I want to continue shifting us away from simply identifying what's wrong, right? What's missing, or what might be getting in the way, right? Of progress, of advancement, of developing those capabilities, and toward what we're actually doing about it, okay? Toward what I might call the prescription, right? Here's the problems, right? That was prior to episode 319. We had several episodes. We talked about different things that could get in the way of progress, okay? All the way up to the training itself and how that can develop false expectations and or kind of a sense of psychic martial arts, right? Where there's a whole bunch of information that we have that allow us to do cool techniques correctly, whatever, right? At speed in the dojo. Information that we would not have out on the street against a unique stranger who wants to beat the shit out of us. Okay? And we'll do everything they can to prevent us from doing our stuff and to make sure that their stuff gets in. Okay? So the point here is that ultimately, right, that's what training is supposed to give us, right? Not simply more problems to think about, right? Not another reason to question whether what we're doing is working, right? But a clearer understanding of how to move forward and make progress. Okay. So I titled this episode From Curriculum to Classroom, right? And again, it's always about training for real progress, right? And if you're joining me live, as always, right, go ahead and let me know that, one, you're here, right? Just put it in the comments. Let me know you're here. And let me know where you're watching or listening in from. And we're simulcasting across a couple of Facebook pages, X, used to be Twitter, and YouTube, places like that, right? So, just let us know where you're signing in from. And as always, if I say something raises a question, or if you've had an experience as a student or an instructor that relates to what we're discussing, by all means, right? Put that in the comments as well, right? And as always, since Alexander's helping me keep an eye on things, and we will stop periodically to see what questions or observations you guys have. So that being said, Sensei Alexander, James Sensei, how you doing? What's up? I haven't talked to him I don't know, since Wednesday. He's a busy man. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Right. No bodies you had to hide today or anything like that? You good?
Not today.
Don't admit on recording. Anyway, I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Busy as always, so got a whole bunch of extra training and stuff like that coming up. So yeah, awesome. Anybody on? Who's on? Well, I mean, shit, I've got a bunch of numbers popping in now. So anybody sign in? Who's on? Our regular
So far,
crew?
Alan, Kyle, and Maury, and Justin Green from Washington State has checked in.
Oh, cool. Well, it's earlier for you, Justin, than it is for us.
Indeed.
Let me get a sound check from folks, because last time people said that things were kind of freezing up here or there, and then all of a sudden it would speed up to catch up, whatever. So, James, you didn't see anything on your side, right? I think we already talked about that. But
Yeah,
apparently,
the video was a little off, but the audio came through fine.
yeah. So, I mean, I guess it would be okay once it hits the podcast directories, but I'm still gonna re-record things just so we don't have a quality issue. Anyway,
Kyle said, "So far, so good."
cool. Thanks, Kyle. Now Alan's going to jump in because they have this brother from a different mother competition going on. You watch. He'll say something, right? Crayons, treats, something. Anyway, I was bragging about Alan. Well, not really bragging. I shared something on one of the military veterans pages on Facebook that I'm part of, and it's gotten lots and lots of attention. It's one of those, like there's no I in team, right? The meme said there's no H in United States Army. Or no, it says the H in United States Army stands for happiness, and it's got guys in full gear just sloshing through the mud and stuff like that, right? Yeah. So somebody posted for Marines, the C in United States Army means crayon. So, I mean, it was just like all over the place. And yeah, I shared a bit about Alan owning the whole Marine crayon thing. So, some people always have to have a claim to fame, right? Either be famous or be infamous, but don't be average and don't be boring. Right? Anyway, all right, we good?
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. So now, last week, again, in that episode, for those of you who need reference, that was episode 319. We made what I think is a very important distinction, right? We talked about the difference between a martial arts curriculum that is essentially an accumulation of stuff, right? A list of skills and techniques, whatever, right? And often what it looks like is, beginners get the simple stuff, and the next group gets next complication and whatever, right? But a difference between that and a curriculum designed around development towards specific real world capabilities, right? And I gave you a metaphor that I want to carry forward tonight, right? That I want to carry forward to this episode. Not that this is a part 2 or anything, but you'll see the logic between last episode, this episode, and even next episode, where we're going to go from really big picture. Here we're drilling down more deeply, and then next episode even more detailed, I guess, right? But that metaphor was the curriculum is the map, and capability is the destination, right? And that's important, because if I hand you, right, one of our student module workbooks, you're certainly going to find lists, right? You're going to find list of what we have in here. We got list of skills and stuff, right? We got list of skills, right? Strikes, kicks, right? Techniques against different types of attacks, drills, knowledge requirements, right? There's vocabulary, there's history stuff, that kind of stuff related to the art, testing, review material, right? All that's in there. But I showed you last week that there are also statements throughout these workbooks describing what kind of practitioner we're trying to develop at any given stage, right? So let's see. Where are we? Okay, yeah. So this is the Module 2 workbook, right? So in here under Shokyu, which is the blue belts, the Module 2 stuff, right? In the dojo, your goal through Module 2 is to focus on the 3 keys of strategic movement: timing, or when to move; distancing, to stretch out your opponent; and angling, the key to strategic placement, right? Take this time to be aware of the body's angling, as well as the feeling of drifting just out of the way of your assailant's attack, only to return like a wave with more force because of your original movement, right? Again, there's just more and more, right? So there's very specific keys to capabilities, right? And I know it can be really easy to just kind of peruse through and see strikes, kamae, kicks, right? But there's a lot of stuff packed into just a few pages. I say a few pages. That one's probably 24 pages, okay, not counting covers, right? But either way, right? What kind of practitioner we're trying to develop at any given stage? If you're the student, what kind of practitioner will you be as you go through and complete any given stage, right? What should you be capable of doing now that you couldn't do before? What should you be capable of doing as you graduate out of one of these levels or a module or whatever, right? That you couldn't do when you entered it or before it, right? What should you understand differently? What qualities should be emerging, right, as you're going through the process, right? What kind of things should you be able to recognize? What kinds of problems should you now be better prepared to handle, right? And that's a very different way of looking at curriculum, because now learning another technique isn't necessarily progress. It might contribute to progress, but it isn't automatically proof of progress. And this can throw someone off, right, who comes from training in other systems where they used the other type of curriculum. I know it did for me, right? Soke's talked about this and how prior training methods and systems that he went through before he found Takamatsu Sensei, right, and how those training methods impeded his development in these arts, and how he's seen others from different systems struggle with this kind of approach, where knowing another kata isn't necessarily progress. Getting another stripe or belt isn't necessarily progress, right? Those things should ideally be evidence of development that has already occurred, right? And that's why we spent some time last episode looking at that second part of our student creed, right? This creed that students get when they first start. There's 3 parts to it. But this second part, right? I believe in what I study. I am disciplined. I am ready to learn and advance. It sounds very, very simple, right? But as I explained then, I don't merely see that first statement. I believe in what I study, okay? It, just like the previous one, right? In part 1, I believe in myself. I'm confident I can accomplish my goals. Part 3, I believe in my teachers. I show respect to all who help me progress. Now, coupled with this one, right? These are 3 important keys that studies have shown that without one or more of these things, right? Self-doubt creeps in. We're not disciplined, and we don't do what we know needs to be done unless we feel motivated or comfortable or happy or not exhausted or whatever, right? Whatever, okay? I don't need a damn teacher, you know? Missing one or more of these things will cause us to fail or quit sooner, okay? But again, as I talked about last episode, right? That first statement in this second part, right? I believe in what I study. Okay. I don't merely see that as something that the student promises to me, to themselves, statement of affirmation, right? I think there's a promise running in the other direction as well. Okay. If I'm asking that student to invest their time, yeah, their money, their energy, their trust, and potentially years of their life following this particular curriculum, then I have a responsibility to make sure that what I'm asking them to believe in is actually designed to take them somewhere productive, meaningful. Okay. But tonight, right, during this episode, I want to take the next step, because having a good map isn't enough. At some point, we have to actually travel, right? And that's where we move from curriculum design into classroom or lesson design. Okay. So the curriculum isn't the lesson plan any more than the map is the territory it's depicting. It's one of the first things we learned in the military when we were doing land navigation. Okay. We have maps, help us get from point A to point B, but we also send out forward observers. We also send out scouts, not just to see what the enemy's doing, but to actually see the actual lay of the land, because the map is not the territory. Right? It's a depiction. It's a symbolic depiction, right? It's keys and references and things like that to give us an idea about the landscape, right? About the territory that it's covering, but it's not the territory. Okay. And we talked about things like that in the past, right? The dojo is not the fight environment, right? The kata is not the fight, right? Your partner is not the guy who wants to take your friggin' head off. I mean, depending on what you do to your partners, maybe, but no. Okay. So one of the mistakes that I think instructors make, and students can make this mistake too, right, is assuming that the curriculum and the lesson plan are basically the same thing. They're not. Right? The curriculum tells me, where is this student going? The lesson plan asks, what does this student need today to move closer to that destination? Okay, in my dojo, we have the curriculum workbooks, outlines everything. We have lesson plans, but the instructors also have the ability to deviate from either plan based on who's in front of them, mistakes that are being made, or successes that are being made, right? And adjust accordingly. Not just show up and throw out a bunch of stuff and call it a day. Okay? But again, the curriculum tells me where any student or group of students is going because of where they are level-wise, right? Where they should be, right? That belt around their waist, that color should tell me what they've already learned, what they're working on, and what's next. Okay? So where's the student going? The lesson plan, right? That's more about what does this student or what does this group of students need today to move closer to that destination, right? We got caught up in working on techniques for quite a while because we're working on specifics, right? But we hit a point where technique, training, and things that students were working on was not getting any better. Something was missing. And so I made a statement. I said, for the next several weeks, we're going to work on drills and not techniques. We're going to work on drills that will expose problems, mistakes, and whether or not we actually have the ability that the technique is pointing to, regardless of how pretty the technique looks. Okay? So where's the student going? What does the student need today? Those are related questions. Yes? Okay? But they're not identical questions. And that's why if, again, you looked at one of our student workbooks, if you're one of my students, long distance, local, whatever, right? If you looked at those, you might only see 2 or 3 drills specifically mentioned at any particular level. Okay? But that doesn't mean those are the only drills that I or any of the instructors are allowed to use. Okay? And what I also found is that if we stick to only those, monkey brain, right? Mine did it too, and my teachers did it, right? Has a tendency to turn those drills into techniques. And now people are doing them step by step instead of them bringing the technique more to life. Okay? But it's not the same. Okay? Because, let's say you're in class, right? Maybe I watch you tonight and discover that you're having trouble with a particular technique, right? And after watching you for, 30 seconds, 3 minutes, whatever, right? I realize technique's not your problem. Your footwork is, or your kama is, or your distance is wrong, or you're trying to manufacture or create kuzushi or whatever, balance breaking or whatever, after the fact, instead of recognizing that your movement should already be doing what it should already be doing to his structure, to his body, right? So why would I keep making you repeat the entire technique, hoping that at some point you'll get it right? Maybe I need to pull one piece out. Maybe I need to give you a drill you learned 6 months ago, right? Maybe I need to simplify the problem. Or maybe, and we'll talk about more about this later, right? Maybe I need to just, for a minute, right, give you a problem from 6 months or a year or two in the future, in your future, right? So you can finally recognize why the thing you're satisfied or comfortable with today isn't going to be good enough for where you're going, right? That's teaching from the map, not merely reading the map to the student. And the same thing goes for going to Japan, learning things, taking notes, and coming back and just duplicating the same things. I'll talk about a glitch in that system as well. Okay. And this distinction, right? This difference, it matters whether or not you're an instructor, right? If you're a student and you're tuned in or you're listening, I don't care, now or in my future on one of the podcasts, right? Or the directories. Understanding this changes how you see, right? How you interpret what happens in class. Because sometimes sensei takes you backward. My students know this, right? We'll pull out a Mod 1 technique and look at it. Look, this is what you learned in Mod 1. But if you're 3 levels above that, 4 levels, 5 levels above that, and you're still doing it like a Mod 1 person, development has not occurred, okay? But we'll look at it, okay? Here's how a Mod 2 person should be employing this. It should get easier even after we make the problem, what the uke is allowed to do, more complex. He's resisting more. He's bigger. He's heavier, right? He's allowed to not let you do your cool move, okay? Same thing, Mod 3, Mod 4, right? Here's how a Mod 2 person should be able to do it. Here's how a Mod 3 person should be able to do it. Here's how, right? That's development, okay? Again, sometimes, sensei takes you backwards. It doesn't necessarily mean you're regressing, right? Sometimes you're being given something that isn't written on your curriculum belt level checklist. If you even have one of those, Right? Not everybody in every dojo or training group has such a thing. Right? Alan, what do I always say? Not my fault. Right. I can hear you across the cyber void. Right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're off curriculum. Sometimes you're working on something you think you already know. That doesn't necessarily mean there's nothing new being taught, right? And sometimes since I might show you something you're nowhere near ready to perform at that required level. Shodan, Nidan, Sandan, Hachidan, Eitan, whatever, right? It doesn't necessarily mean you've suddenly jumped 3 ranks, right? The question underneath all of those situations should be, what is this experience supposed to develop in me? Right? And that's a way better question than, is this on my test? Okay? Those 2 questions tend to produce very different martial artists, very different practitioners. Right? So tonight we're going to look at several pieces of this, right? We're going to talk about what advancement should actually look like if we're developing capability rather than merely accumulating material, right? We're real world capability versus dojo abilities. Right? We're going to look at why advanced practitioners keep returning to the keyhole, right? The so-called quote unquote basics, right? Instead of permanently leaving them behind. Okay? We're going to look at the relationship between the written curriculum and what actually happens during class. And we're going to get into that statement I mentioned before, right, in the intro, right? Remember that? That some instructors kind of hold out as, I don't know, credibility enhancers or something like that, right? Where they say, we teach exactly the way they teach it in Japan. Right? Because I want to ask what that actually means, right? Not to criticize Japan, not to suggest that Western instructors somehow know better than the Japanese master teachers, right? Quite the opposite, right? I think we may sometimes misunderstand why those teachers are teaching the way they're teaching. And then come home and faithfully copy the visible behavior, right? The visible demonstration, while missing part of the developmental logic riding beneath it. And that creates some fascinating questions about drills, about repetitions, about randori, about different levels working together or different levels working separately, right? What belongs in class, what the student should be doing outside of class, right? And even what the teacher should or should not be responsible for teaching, right? I'm also going to give you a current real world example from what I'm doing right now with an upcoming Samurai Sword primer that I'm going to be doing, right? And our Fall Warrior Protector weekend intensive, because I deliberately chose not to make that primer just another single day or weekend seminar, right? I spread it across 4 weeks, 1 lesson a week. And there's a developmental reason for that decision that fits perfectly with what we're talking about during this episode. Okay. And finally, especially for those of you who you're already instructors, or even those of you who think you may want to become instructors someday, we're going to start looking at something else. Knowing the art and knowing how to develop another human being in the art are not the same skill sets. Okay. And that's going to give me an opportunity later on, right, to tell you about the next run of my 16-week accelerated instructor training program. I always just say AITP, right, which is actually starting in September. But first, we need to understand why those instructor skills matter. And I think by the time we get there, that should be pretty obvious. Okay. Anyway, before we jump into the first major piece, right, James, Sensei Alexander. Anybody else jump in?
No. If they did, they have not said anything.
Yeah, okay. Lurkers. That's what
Mhm.
they are, lurkers. Okay. So for those of you watching live, right, here's a question I'd like you to think about. And if you're okay with it, put your answer in the comments. When you hear the word advanced, what do you think should actually be different about an advanced martial artist? Don't give me a belt color. Don't give me years of training. Don't give me they know more techniques. Okay. As Sensei McLaurin's wife would say, really? Yeah, no, right? Tell me what they should actually be capable of doing better, because that's exactly where we're going next. Right? We'll circle back and check on those in a little bit, right? So while you're doing that, right, if these conversations are useful to you, make sure you do the thing, do the do, right? Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, all that kind of stuff, right? Share this episode with somebody else in the martial arts who you think would benefit from these discussions. Okay, helps us get these ideas in front of more of the right people. Okay, all right. So let's start with that question, right? If curriculum is developmental, what should advancement actually look like? Okay, and if our answer is still simply more techniques, then we haven't really changed the curriculum at all, right? We've just changed what we're calling it. Okay, so let's start with that question. What should actually be different about an advanced martial artist? Okay. James, any comments pop in? Anything that people think should be different before I toss out my spiel?
Just Kyle. Smoother execution and less effort.
Okay, cool. Makes sense. Just him. He was the only brave one.
Yes, sir.
Stick his neck out there, have his name attached to things for posterity's sake. Once it's on the internet, man, it's always there. All right. So, what should actually be different, okay, about an advanced martial artist? Because this is where I think we have to be careful, right? If I say that I'm designing a developmental curriculum, but all I've really done is arranged increasingly complicated techniques under increasingly advanced or different belt colors, then I haven't created a developmental curriculum. I've created an organized accumulation curriculum. Okay? Does that make sense? And there's nothing inherently wrong with learning more material. Okay? I mean, of course, you're going to learn more, right? As you move through the training, right? You're going to encounter additional kata. You're going to learn different weapons, different attacks, different tactical problems, different concepts. But as we discussed last episode, the accumulation of material should be happening alongside and ideally in service of development, right? One of the things that people notice about our curriculum is that it doesn't mirror the Shoden, Chuden, Okuden levels and lists in the lineages. Students get all that stuff, but like there's sampling of Kotoryu Shoden kata in module 2. But in module 3, students get some Chuden kata. Why? Because they match the strategies and the capabilities we're working on at those different levels, not just because of where they are on a scroll. Okay. Those kata allow me to teach certain strategic and tactical principles, and a student to develop specific progressive abilities in increasing control of another human body, of their own body, of a situation in and of itself, right? And again, so the techniques, right, are there in service of those development, those levels or those principles of development, right? And in our case, that development we're looking for is real world capabilities, right, against one or more, this is important, one or more unique strangers, not our training partners, right, looking to beat, break, or kill us. Not the performance of the kata in the dojo. Of course, that'll happen. Just because we can do it in the dojo doesn't mean that we don't further test that to make sure that if somebody takes the script away, if the uke doesn't act in our favor, right? If they actually transition from uke to teki, they start acting more and more like somebody who is actually going to resist, actually is going to adjust and adapt and get something in there next and whatnot, right? They're going to exploit an opening that we left open, but we didn't know we were doing it, right? Whatever, right? We should probably know that before we get out on the street with this stuff. Okay? So the question isn't merely, what does a green belt know that an orange belt doesn't? Or what does an orange belt know that a blue belt doesn't, right? I also want to know, what can the green belt do that the orange belt cannot reliably do yet? And that's not a kata question. Okay? And beyond that, how does the green belt handle a problem differently? In our curriculum, Mod 4 is about efficiency. Right? It's about being able to do more with less. Mod 3 is about direct, committed movement, intent, action, right? That level is necessary for the effectiveness and efficiency at Mod 4. We're not just swapping out techniques. We're not just doing things differently. Right? And that's where things get interesting. Okay? Because that's where we enter the realm of the, what I call the what's next problem. Okay? And I've talked with students over the years. People have sent me emails, they've contacted me about training or whatever, right? And these people have the goal, or a goal, right, of earning a black belt. And I'll ask them, okay, what does that mean? Well, if I have a black belt, then I can like teach martial arts. You know, that's not what I mean. Okay, you just told me what the black belt allows you to do with regards to teaching, but not really. Okay, black belt means nothing when it comes to teaching. Okay, a black belt means that you've passed test or whatever, demonstrating specific standards of proficiency with things. It's just like a high school diploma, just like a university, degree, whatever, right? Okay. But again, the goal is, right? They want to earn their black belt. It needs to. Okay. Okay. Right. What does that mean? And again, sometimes they look at me like I'm being deliberately difficult, or like, I get that deer in the headlight look kind of thing, right? And they just repeat it back, right? What do you mean? What does that mean? I want to be a black belt. Right. Yeah, I heard you. What does that mean? What do you want to be capable of doing? What problems do you want to be able to solve? What qualities do you expect to possess? Right? And saying, well, I want to be able to wipe the floor with somebody's ass who throws a punch at me. That's too vague. Okay? That's too vague. Right? How should you move differently? How should you think differently? Respond differently? Because otherwise, we've made the symbol of development, the destination, right? The goal, instead of the development itself. Wanting to be wanted to, I want to earn a black belt. Okay. Any curriculum will get you there where black belt is a benchmark. That doesn't tell me anything about what you're capable of doing. Okay? The same problem continues after black belt. Okay? Right? You got Shodan. What's next? Nidan. Okay. What's next? Sandan. Then Yondan. Then Godan. Sensei, you know this. Right? And eventually you're just naming another destination on what I see as an infinite road of numbers. Right? Or maybe the answer becomes, well, now you learn harder stuff. Okay. And then what? Well, harder stuff after that. Or now you learn more advanced kata. Okay. And after that, well, more advanced kata. You see where I'm going with this? Right? At some point, that stops being a very compelling developmental vision. It's kind of like the way most people have been convinced to live life. Right? Think about this. Right? They make you go to kindergarten. Then you start messing around because you're a kid, right? You got to get this stuff right? You won't go to elementary school, right? You won't go to first grade and stuff, right? So you do your shit right and everything, right? And you go to first grade. Now you're in elementary school, right? What is that? First grade to fifth or sixth grade or whatever, right? In every freaking grade, right? Got to do it right. Got to do racing, pass to the next level, okay? And it's not like you're not learning stuff, right? And it's not like you're not figuring things out. Okay? But if we look back on our school, I memorized more shit that I don't remember than capabilities that I developed. Because it really does come down to those three R's that the old folks used to talk about when I was younger and they were old folks, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic. Math, reading, and writing. Research, comprehension and communication back and forth, right? And being able to not go broke. Okay. But you're in elementary school, right? You got to get your shit together, right? Or you won't go to, for me, it was junior high school. Now it's middle school, right? And then same stuff in there. And then you won't go to high school. And then you go to high school, right? You won't be able to go to tech school or high school or get a job or whatever. And then you do that, right? And then now it's about promotions, right? Got to learn this stuff, got to do this stuff and everything to get promoted. And then, you're working toward retirement, right? And then sure enough, you get close or you retire. And the next thing you know, you get a phone call or a knock on the door. Hey, can I sell you a burial plot? That's what accumulation looks like in life. It says nothing about what that person was capable of doing. Because some people can turn that education, one reason or another, into a nest egg and retirement and travel and stuff like that. And other people turn it into a pissed off, resentful attitude because they can't get shit to work. Aging does not mean automatic wisdom. If every year feels the same and is the same and we're capable of doing the same, then we didn't become more capable of anything. There's a difference. Hazmi Sensei's talked about it. The Dalai Lama of Tibet has talked about it. All these wise people over whatever, Marcus Aurelius, all these guys over time have talked about it. It's a huge difference between existing and living. As a matter of fact, Reverend Jikai, my Mikyo teacher, one of the first questions he asked me was if I knew the difference between a rut and a grave. Like some people say they're stuck in a rut, that kind of thing. You know what a rut is, right? Tire, wheel, whatever, in a muddy ground, right? He asked me what the difference between a rut and a grave was. I thought about it, and I said, they're both holes in the ground. He goes, you're close. The difference between a rut and a grave are the dimensions. That's it. So when somebody says they're stuck in a rut, or they feel like they're stuck in a rut, or whatever, okay? Anyway, right? So what interests me much more is this. If you're one of my students, because I can't do anything if somebody isn't, right? And I guess maybe the way I should say this is what should interest an instructor more is this, right? Can you handle increasingly difficult, increasingly complex, increasingly uncertain problems while requiring less unnecessary effort to do it, right? Now, Kyle said it in fewer words, but that's development, okay? And I gave it an analogy last episode that I want to bring back just briefly because it illustrates this, I think, really well. Okay? If you were on for that one, then you probably remember this, right? I was talking about two people working in an office, right? Or whatever workspace, right? One of them is relatively new on the job, right? They're barely keeping up with the normal workload. They're doing everything manually. They're checking, rechecking everything, worried about making mistakes, trying to remember what comes next, right? They're going down a checklist, right? And then the boss walks in at, 2 p.m. and says, hey, I need this additional project finished before the end of the day, right? What's the new employee think? You have got to be freaking kidding me, right? They're already overwhelmed, right? Now they're frantic, okay? Maybe they're now thinking about having to skip a break. Maybe they're staying late. Maybe they're ready to quit, right? Whatever, right? But working near them, right? It's this person who's been doing this for a long time, a couple of years, 10 years, 15, whatever, right? And they look over and they go, okay, no problem. What do you mean no problem? Hey, calm down, okay? We're going to move this over here, right? We're going to do these two things together because they're virtually the same, right? And that thing there doesn't actually need to be done until tomorrow morning. So we're going to shift that, right? We'll automate this, whatever, right? And whatever, right? They lay this thing out and they look at the new guy and they go, look, chill out, dude. We're going to have this done in plenty of time to leave. And we're probably going to have time for an extra coffee break or two. Okay? Same additional problem. Very different practitioners. The expert isn't necessarily capable because they can simply work harder or work faster or whatever. Right? They're capable because they've developed better processes. They recognize patterns. They know what matters and what doesn't. Right? They know what effort is being wasted. Right? They know what can happen simultaneously. Right? They know what can be omitted. They know where the leverage points are. And because of that, the harder problem doesn't necessarily produce proportionately harder work. Right? And that's why I've always found something interesting about martial arts training. One of many things. But sometimes it appears that we've flipped this. It's almost reversed, right? White belts come off the floor looking pretty good, right? They trained and whatnot, right? They learned their technique. They're smiling, right? Maybe they broke a little sweat. And then you look over at the black belts, right? And they're soaked. They're exhausted, right? They're muscling things. They're trying increasingly complicated combinations, right? They're doing more, harder, faster, more resistance, more techniques, more effort. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. Shouldn't development eventually begin moving the other way? Because that's certainly what I experienced in the work world. And it's certainly what I see when I go to Japan and I watch the master teachers, right? They don't become less capable as the problem gets harder, right? They actually end up doing less unnecessary work, movement, power, whatever, right? The attacker seems to be doing more, right? The problem could be more complicated, right? Multiple attackers, weapons, whatever. And somehow Sensei appeared to be doing less. Not nothing, but less waste, less tension, less unnecessary movement, right? Less holding on to or struggling or conflict with what was already happening, right? And yet their result was very often dramatically better. Not just a little better. It was, wow. Right? And that's the developmental direction I'm interested in. That's what I tell even the beginners. Right? We're doing it this way because your job is not to win. This is Nagato Sensei's lesson. You don't have to win, just don't lose. Okay? And I know that can bake people's noodles. But your first job is to learn how to make your job easier at defending and his job harder at attacking. That says nothing about techniques. That says nothing about belt level. That's a capability. Harder to hit, harder to hold on to. Those are capabilities. Okay? No, they're not attached to any particular belt level. No, they're attached to our Mod 1 competency stuff. But, okay? That doesn't mean that advanced training always feels easy. Okay? And this is where another analogy might help. Okay? Think about certain types of physical training, right? I don't know what they're called, but it's those kind where like you have like 30 seconds or 60 seconds or whatever, right? And the instruction is, here's an exercise, right? We're going to do this. Do as much as you can, right? Maximum output, okay? Maybe it's push-ups, burpees, whatever, kettlebell swings, whatever it is, okay? First time you do it, 60 seconds feels awful. Breathing hard, muscles are burning. You finish thinking, that was maximum effort. Yep. 6 months later, you do the same 60-second exercise. And guess what? Yep. Still feels like shit. Still hard. Why? Because you're still giving maximum effort. Right? Maximum is maximum. That 30 seconds or 60 seconds or whatever it is still feels like shit. But something has changed. Because maybe the first time you performed those 15 reps or whatever you did in 30 seconds, 16 seconds, whatever it was, right? Now you're not doing 15, Now you're doing 32. Okay. The subjective experience can still be, that's friggin' hard. But your output is nowhere near the same. That's development. Okay, that's development. Right? So when I say advanced martial artists should be capable of handling more with less unnecessary effort, I'm not promising eventually nothing challenges you. Okay? Yeah, okay. That's not what I mean. Okay? And that's not reality. Right? We're increasing the challenge too. Right? The problem gets harder. The attack gets more complex. The conditions become less favorable for us. The amount of uncertainty increases. But your capacity has changed. That's mastery. Not the ability to do a technique well and smoothly and whatever, right? That's part of it, but that's dojo proficiency. That's not, right? Can I do the same with less? Hatsumi Sensei has been pointing to that his entire career. I'm a walking, talking reflection of that. I mean, this is pointed to by all the jackasses online in the comments. Right? You're fat, you're old, you're bald. How can I trust somebody? Yeah. How did I get better while getting older, more broken, whatever? That's a huge difference. Right? So now let's go back to curriculum. Okay. If module 1 or level 1 or phase 1 or belt 1 or whatever, right, says learn these things. And then the next one says learn these things plus some more. And then the next one says here are another 20 techniques. Okay. And then the next level is like, I don't know, here's another 30 or here's whatever, right? Then what we've primarily measured is exposure and accumulation. But in a developmental curriculum, I should be able to look at those levels and say, at this stage, the student should be able to do something differently. They should be able to perceive something differently. They should handle greater complexity. They should require less unnecessary effort, right? They should need fewer movements to accomplish the same outcome. They should recover from mistakes more effectively, right? They should be able to adjust on the fly, right? They should become less dependent on the attacker behaving exactly the way the technique originally suggested, right? And more importantly, the things they learned earlier should improve because of what they've developed later, right? That's a big one, right? I mentioned this before, but it's worth bringing back because it's literally written into our curriculum, okay? Every level, okay? Strikes, kicks, body movement skills, kamae, right? That kind of stuff. And then these lines. Review all previous with improvement. All previous with improvement. All previous with improvement. Okay? That's not filler. That's part of the standard. Because when you enter mod 3, that was mod 2, you enter mod 3, let's just pick mod 3, right? I don't expect your module 1 skills to remain frozen at module 1 quality. Why would I? You only had 1 to 6 months in training, which means you had 1 to 6 months of coordination, work with the skills, understanding, perception, right? You aren't supposed to put those things into a little box marked completed, right? You're bringing everything you've done subsequently, right? Developed, and what you're taking everything that you've subsequently developed. That's it. Back into those things, right? And again, we use mod 3. That gives us a good example, right? By that point, you are deliberately developing that more explosive, we call fire quality, right? Direct, committed movement, no wind up, right? No hesitation, right? Speed, it looks like you're going faster, and you are, but it's not because you're firing your muscles to go faster. It's because your timing's better. It's because you're moving in a way and at a time to keep him from getting his structure into a position where his speed, his strength, his power, whatever, matter, right? We're looking at recognizing opportunities, right? We're taking the fight to the attacker when appropriate, right? We're bringing together things that previously existed as separate skills, integration, right? We're going from a calm state to a concentrated action when necessary. As a matter of fact, it's one of the capabilities listed in the Module 3 workbook. The ability to change modes as if you were flipping a light switch, not getting around to getting ready. Okay? If those capabilities are actually developing, why wouldn't they change your Mod 1 technique? Why wouldn't they change your Module 2 techniques? Why wouldn't your understanding of an old grab defense change? Why wouldn't your ability to do it improve? Why wouldn't an old strike improve? Right? Why wouldn't the way you use kamae change? The technique may have been introduced 6 months ago, 2 years ago, but the person performing it now isn't the same person who learned it 6 months ago. At least they shouldn't be, unless they're seeing each thing as a thing to be learned rather than something that is teaching them how to be more capable. Yeah. In our curriculum, again, even with the belts, right? We throw people off when we go to Japan and stuff, right? So what's the white stripe mean through your belt? What's the black stripe mean through your belt, right? Each module has 3 belt levels. That is a microcosm of the whole martial arts training process: beginner, intermediate, advanced. So each module focuses on a strategy or a strategic approach to a self-defense situation. Long range defensive angling, or using that long range to stretch him out, break his structure in a way that his strength, power, speed, whatever gets neutralized, right? How to affect his entire body from one given point that I might have, okay? Wrist reversals, that kind of thing. Module 3, just the opposite. Close range, get in there. Now we got throws and those kind of things, right? So each of the modules has an introductory stage, has a and has a review stage. Okay, at the review stage, the student color is for that particular module or element, and then they've got this longitudinal black stripe that runs through the belt. Okay, and yes, right, part of review is exactly what you'd expect. Did we miss anything? Did I forget something? Is there something you haven't practiced enough? Right? Do we need to clean up something? Okay. But review isn't just prove that you remember everything we showed you. It's also show me this material again now that you're the person who has completed this developmental stage. Okay. And if necessary, can you do those earlier things with this level's improvement added? That's different. Can you now see something in those techniques that you couldn't see when they were first introduced to you? Can you bring capabilities into those techniques that you didn't possess the first time around? Because if advancement only changes the new material, I'm not convinced we're really advancing the practitioner. They're moving up the rungs of the ladder. But again, look at life. You can see people doing that kind of shit on the job, right? Somebody's got 20 years on the job. Okay. This is the opposite guy, the one I was talking about with the processes and stuff, right? One of the things that always bothered me when I worked in the corporate structure, working for a company or whatever, is a job would come up, right? And people with seniority, time-wise, got dibs on the job over somebody who was newer. 20 years was going to get the job over the guy at 10 years or 6 months or whatever. But what if it's a leadership position, a supervisory position? What the flying flock? Does somebody who has 20 years on the job say anything about their ability to manage, lead, or direct other people, other than believing that a leader just tells people what to do? Maybe that's why companies have so many freaking problems. Right? Because if the person that got overlooked, let's say they had a year, they've only been around for a year, right? They came from the military, or they came from someplace where they have leadership skills, or the entire time, that entire year, they've been doing correspondence courses. They've been doing additional certification courses and whatnot, right? Okay. They don't just have a year on the job. They've been increasing their level of knowledge, understanding, ability, capabilities. There's latent capabilities there. And let's say the person with 20 years on the job, they stopped applying themselves a year in, and they've been doing things the same way. Let's say they haven't been cheating the system, taking extra breaks, whatever, okay, for the last 20 years. That just tells me that they have a year's worth of experience, or a year's worth of knowledge or training, okay, that they've just duplicated 19 more times. Where the other person in that 1 year has just kept propelling themselves and developing themselves more and more. Okay. Sorry. As a business owner, I'm going to take the person that has learned more and has more knowledge and capability, even if they've only been around for a year, over the person that has done nothing but do the same things the same way, and maybe even pissed and moaned about anything new, training, new systems, new procedures, new whatever, even if it was going to improve things. Why would I put them in a damn leadership position? Holy shit. But again, okay, it's no different than what I was just talking about with martial arts. I'm not convinced that we're really talking about somebody who's advancing, other than getting a different job title and a bigger paycheck, which is really all the guy with the 20 years is worried about. Sorry. That rubbed anybody the wrong way? Okay. So let me stop here for a second. Okay. So, Sensei Alexander, any questions, comments coming in? And for those of you watching live, again, here's something I'd be curious about, right? If you've ever gone back to something you learned years earlier, right? A kata, a technique, a drill, even a kamae, right? And suddenly realize that you didn't understand it nearly as well as you thought you did, right? Or maybe you discovered something that you simply couldn't have seen when you originally learned it, right? You went back and you went, holy shit, how the hell did I miss that, right? Put that in the comments, because that's not evidence that the earlier lesson failed. Sometimes it's evidence that you developed enough to finally see what was actually there. Okay. Anyway, James, questions, comments, complaints? I'll take those
Just
framed away.
Alan's answer to your question earlier about the advanced martial artist. Uh, Alan said an advanced martial artist should be able to decide where and what should be done as far as handling a situation. For example, being checked rather than hurt, hurt rather than maim, maim rather than kill, for no life can be replaced. An advanced student should not jump into a situation lightly.
Oh, there you go. Right. Absolutely. Right. Because often people think about capability being just physical, right? More techniques, more ways to wipe the floor with his ass, whatever, right? And yeah, I think one of those capabilities are absolutely better able to assess a situation to know if action or whatever of a certain type is necessary. But I also think they should be, in my opinion, calmer under pressure, right? And they themselves should be different. They should have a different relationship to risk, stress, all those kind of things that, right, might trigger collateral damage. James, we've talked about that in the past, right? Collateral damage. Less trained, less capable people, when more pressure is applied, when more complexity is applied or whatever, they tend to panic. They tend to act out of frustration or anger or whatever, right? And that just creates collateral damage, right? Just somebody else can get hurt. As an example of that, and I was untrained, but I did not know my own strength when things had to come out. I've always been small, that kind of thing, right? I was a skinny teenager. And my stepfather and I mixed it up once when I was 17. I watched him be abusive to my mom, to us, for a lifetime. And he stepped up. I was just trying to end something or whatever. And my mom was behind me, right? I'd stepped in between he and her, and the details don't matter. But either way, I stepped in between he and her, and she put her arms around me and she said, don't. And he said, let him go. And I said, to my recollection, yeah, let me go. And all I remember doing was shrugging. Just just let me go. And I heard her crash into a hutch behind us. And that began the physical mixing up again, once, but, different relationship afterwards. Anyway. But that's one of those things where I call it, this has made my fuse much, much longer. That's a capability. Now, my wife would say that in some situations, my fuse is too damn long, because she's already at the pissed off point, and I'm like just evaluating things, and like I don't even know what, like is it a bad situation? Yeah, but like, should I be pissed off? Should I just like, is that, where should I direct my energy? Because being pissed off will do one of two things: waste time ranting and raving about something that I'm not fixing, or get me so heated that I can't think clearly, and now I go charging through and trying to fix it like the proverbial bull in a china shop. And now I have to fix things and apologize for things and shit like that afterwards. People can forgive you for things, but forgiveness is not forgetfulness, and they shouldn't forget. Okay? It's just like the difference between asking for forgiveness and atoning. People think that atoning, like atoning for your sins, atoning for your errors, whatever, right, is forgiveness, asking for forgiveness, okay? Apologizing. That's part of it, but that's not atonement. That's apologizing. Atonement is acting differently so that it doesn't happen again. They're not the same. It's the same thing, right? I can learn a bunch of stuff and I can have dojo abilities. And I'm not saying that those things won't cross over to the outside world. But there's a difference between knowing and having a really good freaking idea because things were tested, and not just kata testing or sparring testing, right? We've done that in Whiteboard Wednesday over the last couple of weeks, right? Drills and pressure and, these, because unless you're going to do kumite in the dojo and beat the shit out of each other, okay, you can't reproduce an attack situation. And besides that, the attack that's actually going to come from strangers, there's no script. Nobody hands you a script and goes, oh, by the way, 4:00 tomorrow afternoon, 3 of us are going to attack. One's going to have a knife, and we're going to attack this way in this open area. I mean, that sounds like dojo training to me. Okay? It's not the way that works. Okay? So, as Alan was alluding to, with at least part of that was the way I see things when I'm looking at things. That's different. It should be different. That's a capability thing. All right, what else we got, James?
That was it right now.
All righty then. Well, in that case, let's jump back to it. So this brings us back to keyhole. Okay. This is why I don't find it strange at all when master teachers, like we were in Japan this last time, Nagato Sensei said, he was revisiting keyhole again. Okay. I don't find it strange that people with decades and decades and decades of learning and experience say they're going back and looking at the keyhole again. Most beginner and intermediate people hear that and think, wait, what? Right? You still don't know Ichimonji? Right? That's completely backwards. They're not necessarily returning because they forgot the beginner lesson. They're going back and having another look because they're no longer the beginner or intermediate or advanced or senior or whatever, right? Who, right, learned it, developed it, made it better, applied it in different areas, and right? Same kata, same kamae, same kihon model. Not the same eyes. Not the same translator. Different eyes, different body. Right? Remember, Nagato Sensei, most of the master teachers right now are in their 80s. So what do they need to pull out of those basics or out of those fundamental models that can make an 80-year-old, an 85-year-old, an 82-year-old, whatever, right? Just as proficient at controlling a bad situation as a 20-year-old but with less effort, because they don't have the same muscle mass, which means they don't have the same speed, whatever. When one of the things that sold me on this art when I was a white belt was the way Hatsumi Sensei described it. That if we work the process, right, not just go through the curriculum and learn the skills, learn the techniques, right? We should be better at 70 than we're at 20. And not because we work out all the time or work out 2, 3, 5 times harder than a 20-year-old, because that's what it's going to take. Right? His point was that it will be inevitable that your body will change. Arthritis, loss of muscle mass, all kinds of things, right? So any attempt at training to rely on those things that will diminish with age is futile. What we're developing is timing, distancing, angling, assessment, those kind of things. These things improve as we get older. So when we go back and look at things, right, with a different body, with a different understanding, different capability, different questions, which means potentially a different lesson hiding inside something you've been looking at for 30 years, for 40 years. For some of these guys, they trained with Hatsumi Sensei in their late teens. That's when they started, which means if they're in their 80s, they've been looking at this shit for over 60 years, again and again and again. What did it mean to them in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s? You get the idea. Okay. And that leads directly into something else that we need to understand, right? If we're going to take the curriculum off the page and turn it into real training, okay? Because sometimes something isn't visible to us. It's not obvious, right? Because we haven't developed enough yet to see it. Right? Sometimes it's not invisible just because, right, we haven't developed enough, right? Sometimes something wasn't maybe explicitly taught because the teacher assumed it was already there. Right? And that's where this conversation about curriculum gets particularly interesting. When we're talking about a Japanese martial art being taught by native Japanese teachers to Western students. Because before we copy exactly what Sensei teaches, we might need to ask, were his students starting from the same point as ours, if we're instructors? Were our Japanese peers starting from the same point as we were? And I don't mean beginner, white belt, that kind of stuff. I mean something different. And if they weren't, what does that mean for the lesson plan? Okay. And that's where we're going to go next. So, James, anything pop in?
Just Misty's here. Says I'm late. Shitsure shimasu.
Cool. Don't itashimashite. Don't mention it. So, we ended that last section with a question, right? Were Sensei students, okay, if you're an instructor, if you're a group leader, were Sensei students starting at the same starting point as yours? Were my students starting at the same starting point? Was I starting at the same starting point as my Japanese peers. Okay, and if they weren't, what does that mean for the lesson plan? Okay, because remember where we're going tonight. Remember where we're going with this episode, right? We're not trying to redesign the art. Okay, we're not asking how can we westernize the Bujinkan. I mean, that's going to happen without trying to sit down and go, how can we western, right? How do we make modern ninjutsu? What people mean is, how do I do substitution and replacement shit? How do I create my own image of things, or how do I recreate it in my own image? Okay, it's going to westernize because Western students are learning it. It's going to modernize because, well, let's see, clothing is different, weapons are different, vehicles are different, environments are no shit. Huh? But we're not talking about doing those things. We're certainly not suggesting, well, we know better than the Japanese master teachers. That's not the point. It's not the point at all. Okay? The question is much more practical than that. Right? I mean, we are studying ninjutsu, which is all about practicality, right? The question is more practical. The question is, if the curriculum is the map and the capability is the destination, then before I decide what these students need from tonight's class, I probably need to know where they're starting from. Because the same directions don't necessarily work for two people who are standing in the same place, but heading in different directions. Okay. So again, there's this, I think it's a marketing pitch, actually. I think it's an attempt at what's known in psychology as borrowed credibility. Okay. We teach exactly the way they teach in Japan. And I've heard variations of this for decades, right? You see it on websites. You'll hear instructors say it. As a matter of fact, one of my students who now is living in Arizona because he's going to Arizona State University, went to somebody's classes. And that's the claim to fame, right? He would say, yeah, but what about this kind of attack? Or right? We teach exactly the way they teach in Japan. He doesn't go to that class anymore because a lot is missing. Okay. And again, you hear instructors say it. I mean, stuff is plastered all over the place, right? Sometimes it's almost presented as a badge of authenticity. We teach exactly the way they teach at Hombu, or we teach exactly the way they train in Japan. And I understand what they're trying to communicate. I do, right? They're saying we're not making up some Americanized version of this art or some UK version or whatever, right? We're trying to preserve what our Japanese teachers gave us. We're trying to preserve what Hatsumi Sensei has taught. And I respect that intention. I do. But there's still a question hiding underneath that statement. What exactly does the way they teach in Japan mean? Same techniques, same kata, same order, same demonstrations, same amount of explanation, same absence of explanation, same drills, same expectation that there won't be drills. Like the line drills. We do line drills, and people will go, it's not the way they do it in Japan. That's karate stuff. Line people up and everybody does the same kamae at the same time, same punch at the same time. We don't do that. It's not the way they do it in Japan. No shit. If you're training at Hombu, that's what I call seminar style. Because that's not the way classes are run at Sumaya Sensei's dojo. It's not the way classes are run at most of these teachers' dojo, personal dojo. Either way, right? Are we talking about the same relationship between teacher and student, same expectation about what happens after class or between classes. Are we talking about same cultural knowledge, same language, same physical development? And I don't mean exercise at the gym. Same assumptions about what the student should already know before sensei even begins. Because those things aren't necessarily interchangeable between East and West, between Japan and the US, or Australia, or the UK, or Macau, or whatever, right? What if the lesson began before class? Here's what I mean. Imagine a Japanese student walks into Budo class, into Hombu, okay? And imagine that I walk into the same class. Sensei demonstrates something. We both see the demonstration. Okay? We're both standing on the same mat, both on the same tatami, right? We're hearing the same instructor, right? But are we actually receiving the same lesson? Maybe, maybe not. Because that Japanese student may have spent an entire lifetime acquiring things I didn't. Not necessarily martial arts things, life things. And not just language, social conventions, etiquette, ways of sitting, ways of standing, ways of moving through crowded environments, right? Ways of reading relationships between people, ways of recognizing certain cultural references, ways of understanding what is implied without somebody needing to explicitly explain it. Even physical behaviors accumulated from ordinary daily life. So perhaps part of developmental foundation for tonight's Budo lesson wasn't developed in Budo class at all. Life developed it, culture developed it, family developed it, school developed it, yeah, language developed it, their physical environment developed it. And then sensei, a Japanese teacher, gets to build on top of that. That's very different from assuming if sensei didn't teach it during class, it isn't part of what's necessary. Let me give you an example. Okay, we've talked recently about ikichigai, right? It's this concept, right, of passing by. We have a kata in the Tagagi Yoshinryu called ikichigai, right? Where you're passing by somebody that you literally need to get the jump on, because if you let him get the jump on you, you're going to die, right? You're unarmed, he has a sword, whatever, okay? And so, but this ikichigai, it's not just the name of a kata, it's an everyday term in Japanese. And sometimes it's truncated, there's little variations to it and whatnot, but, right, ikichigai. One of the things that I've noticed all over my trips to Japan is how people move through crowded spaces. And maybe those who have gone to Japan with me might think back and remember some of this stuff, okay? Train stations are a really obvious example, okay? You can have dozens, hundreds of people moving in different directions at the same time, through the same gates, through the same plaza areas and whatnot, right? And if you come from the United States, or I think most of the West, Europe and whatnot, right? Sometimes you're watching this thinking, how are these people not constantly running into each other? Right? Because people aren't doing, they're not necessarily doing what a Westerner might expect, right? They're not walking through the station, staring at everybody's eyes. They're not like doing these little side steps and shit like that, right? A lot of people have, right? Back in the day before cell phones, They still walked around the same way. Okay. And they might be looking at their phone, but the phone, I think, gives them a reason, right? Gives them more of a modern reason. But the Japanese typically are not eye contact people, right? But people are coming from different directions. Paths cross, speeds change, and yet there can be this just amazing ability to flow. People glide around one another. They adjust. They go out of their way to not touch each other. And the flow continues. Every once in a while, somebody will break flow because they misjudged. But otherwise, they shift, move through available spaces. Right? I call it surfing the crowd. I give that assignment to students at certain levels to do that at fairs, or to do it at the mall when it's really, really busy, and those kind of things, right? Now, does that mean that every Japanese person is secretly practicing Ninpo Taijutsu while they're going to work? No, of course not, right? But it does mean that if a martial arts lesson, now think about the same thing going on in the US or whatever, right? People are bumping into each other and calling each other names and giving sideways glances because you hit me, or purposely not freaking moving so that other people have to move, right? So think about this, right? If a Japanese student was raised in that environment with those lessons and that cultural thing going on, doesn't mean that they grew up learning ninjutsu. Right? But it does mean that if a martial arts lesson involves navigating bodies, if it involves sensing movement around you, not becoming visually fixated on one person or one thing or whatever, right? Adjusting trajectory, those kind of things, right? The Japanese teacher may be building on top of experiences that have already accumulated thousands and thousands of repetitions in ordinary life. And they don't even mention it. They don't give an analogy. This is like kind of shifting around people at the train station and whatnot, right? I've had fellow instructors tell me that I talk too much in class. I give too much whatever, these analogies and whatnot, right? Just demonstrate it and let them practice. But without analogies that a Western student can understand, because they probably don't have that same thing. It's been my experience and observation that Western people bump into each other intentionally and unintentionally a lot, right? But I need analogies that I can point a student to give that back. Or I take them to Japan, and instead of every day we eat, sleep, shit, go to class, eat, sleep, shit, go to class, right? I take them out into culture. I take them to historical sites. Right? And I point things out because they're important. And they're important because, well, let's go back to my Japanese peer. Hatsumi Sensei, Nagato Sensei, Noguchi Sensei, whatever, right? Building on top of experiences that they don't give any thought to. Why would they? It's just part of everyday life to them. Just part of everyday life for the Japanese student. They make a little reference about flow or ikichigai or whatever. The Japanese student, ikichigai, right? To us, we look it up. Oh, to pass by. Okay. Well, the way we pass by people, not the same way Japanese people pass by people. My Japanese friend, right? So here's a question, right? Do I have those same repetitions? Do I have that same experience? Maybe not. So perhaps my instructor needs to make something explicit. Perhaps my Western instructor needs to make something more explicit that Hatsumi Sensei, or Noguchi Sensei, or Seno Sensei, or Shrei Sensei, whatever, right? Never had to explicitly teach. And there's something even farther below that. Right? But my students that just went to Japan with me this last time, right? You might remember something that Rob Renner's wife, right, said before. Remember, he was running a little bit late from the train station, right? And so she just kind of got things started. And what she started with was, right, remember, she trains in the Bujinkan as well, okay? What she said was, and I'm giving you my recollection, right? So don't treat this like me quoting her word for word, right? But the essence was something like, you may never be able to do things exactly the same because you're not Japanese, right? And I get it, right? Some people could hear that through a very, very superficial filter and think, well, that's racist, right? I mean, isn't that the big thing these days? Anyway, right? Or maybe it's not that. Maybe it's that's elitist, right? Because we're not Japanese, we can't do it like you, right? But that's not how I understood her and understood what she was saying. And as a matter of fact, she qualified it, right? She was pointing toward the fact that our bodies haven't necessarily developed or been developed by the same experiences, right? There are genetic differences between populations, obviously, right? Diet can influence development. But then think about everyday physical habits. And that's what she was talking about, right? How often do you squat to pee? How often do you get all the way down to the floor and back up? Every day. And even if you do, how often? Right? How'd you use the bathroom growing up? How often do you kneel? Right? How do you sleep? Right? Because if you're putting down a futon on the floor, unrolling it at night, rolling it back up, putting it away in the morning, getting down to do that, laying down a certain way from that position, getting back up from that position, right? Rolling that thing back up, right? Every day, again and again. Roll it out at night, sleep, roll it back up in the morning, right? Getting down to do the work to open it, getting down and back up to put it away. Same thing, right? Furniture's different. Not everybody's, living with Western furniture and stuff, right? So they're sitting on the floor. Somebody comes to the door. You get up, you go, answer the door, come back over. Oh, hey, have a seat. So you sit back down. You go, would you like some tea? Great. You get back up. You go get them some tea, right? You come back, sit back down, offer them tea. Would you like some cake or would you like a snack? Get back up. You go, right? Over and over and over again. Okay? How many repetitions of lowering and raising your body does that create over 10, 20, 30, 40 years? Those things adds up, right? And if your body hasn't accumulated those experiences, you can't simply watch somebody whose body has and just conclude, okay, yeah, I'll just move exactly like that. There may be developmental prerequisites underneath that technique that we're watching, that demonstration, that has a lot to do with how well we're going to be able to duplicate it. Okay? And this problem doesn't only exist for Western teachers. Okay? And again, I need to be really clear here, right? This isn't simply Western instructors have to teach things Japanese instructors don't. But the Japanese teacher encounters the same issue when we show up. Think about that. Sensei has like 90 minutes or 2 hours or whatever, however long class is, right? And here comes a room full of Western students. Maybe only for a week, maybe only for 2 weeks. Okay? Maybe some of us, or most of us, don't understand the language. We don't understand some of the cultural references. Our bodies don't move the same way. Yes, I know we have 2 legs, 2 arms, a torso, and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about down to the ligaments, right? We've accumulated the same everyday experiences that we live through. We haven't accumulated experiences they have and their Japanese students have. We might not understand the etiquette. Oh, I've learned to bow and I've learned these phrases. Interesting. Okay. Have you also learned that we breathe in at certain points in the bow and breathe out? I haven't taught most of my students those. I will be soon as we move into drills that are centered around breathing. For the most part, it's not necessary. Okay. But breath syncing with, not sinking as in S-I-N-K, not that, right? Syncing as in sinking, right? It's a huge part, right? And this goes for everybody in any martial art. Because if you think I'm only talking about the Japanese teachers in the Bujinkan, I'm not talking about Okinawan karate teachers or Korean taekwondo teachers or Chinese kung fu. Sorry. Okay, this is an East meets West kind of thing. Okay. We may have very different assumptions about what a teacher is supposed to do. So what is sensei supposed to do? What is Nagato sensei, Noguchi sensei, whatever? What are they supposed to do in class? Okay. Because, like I mentioned this already, school conditions us for certain things. We Westerners were conditioned to learn a certain way. And if you don't believe me, think back to the last time you asked or somebody in a class that you were in grade school, junior high school, college, whatever, when somebody right in the middle of the lecture puts their hands up and go, just on the test, or is this going to be on the test? What are they really asking? Do I need to bother paying attention to this? Japanese classes have been Westernized, but Japanese have different expectations about responsibilities between teachers and students. Okay. So if we're missing a bunch of these things, what is the teacher supposed to do? He's supposed to spend the first hour teaching Japanese culture or teacher-student responsibilities or expectations or whatever, right? Then maybe 30 minutes on biomechanics that a Japanese body will have been conditioned to just by life. Then explain linguistic nuance. Then give us a history lesson. Then teach us how to squat, right? When exactly are we going to get around to the Budo? And that's an important point, because if the Japanese teacher chooses not to stop the entire class and fix everything that we as Westerners were missing, that doesn't necessarily mean those things don't matter. It may simply mean that's not what we're here to teach right now. Or perhaps even he doesn't believe that that's his responsibility to teach you. And that is a huge East-West teacher-student responsibility thing, right? This is where things really get interesting, okay? Because, again, imagine I go to Japan, I train with Sensei, right? Sensei demonstrates A. He doesn't teach B, C, D, or E, right? I come back to the United States and I say, well, Sensei didn't teach B, C, D, or E, therefore those things aren't authentic Bujinkan training, right? Sensei didn't have us do line drills and punch from there. Oh, by the way, I went through those kind of drills at Sumaya Sensei's dojo many times. Okay. But either way, right? So, right, we didn't do those things at home, Boo. So I just conclude that they're not, they're not a part of Bujinkan training. Wait, right? How do I know that? How do I know that? Maybe he didn't teach B through E because the Japanese students already know them. Or because he's Japanese and just does things the Japanese way. Hatsumi Sensei's talked about this. It is not the Japanese senior master teacher's responsibility to teach us the things about Japan and these undercurrents that are basically presuppositions to being able to do this art. It was very, very clear. One time he was very clear through a message through Seno Sensei, right? Sensei was pissed. But he didn't say it himself. He had a senior do it. That we Westerners are in Japan learning a Japanese martial art. It is our responsibility to learn the culture, the etiquette, and all of those things necessary to be able to do that. That pisses a lot of people off because they're coming from a Western perspective. The teacher's supposed to teach me everything I'm supposed to know to pass the test. That's not the way they do it in Japan. Okay? So maybe he didn't teach me B through E because he assumed I should already know them, and if I don't, I will find out and figure it out. Maybe he expects me to investigate them, to study them, to learn them. Okay? Maybe there wasn't enough time. When I was studying with Jikai Sensei, I know it sounds like a Japanese name, right? But it was a given Buddhist Nikkyo name from his teacher, who was Japanese. But my training sessions with Jikai Sensei, he was American, right? Reverend Clark Chaffee. Right? I would go to Illinois or Indiana, wherever he was living, stay with him for a weekend or a week, whatever. We would do these training things, right? And a lot, like I was there for Mikkyo study, but a lot of the lessons were about the way the Japanese do things. And I had to understand that, right? And the way the mandala were laid out and converted based on the way the Japanese do things. And that I had to understand that they wired certain extra symbols into the Japanese mandala that are not in the teachings that those mandala were built from. And certain things were inverted or changed slightly because of public perception, the way they do things, their overall sense of concern about the way the outside world would see them, just different things, right? So there was even a hidden layer inside of Mikkyo because it was Japanese. And they would have to explain that, when you're going to a shop where you're buying statuary or these things, right? You need to know how to ask for things because they're not going to be out. They're not going to be obvious. You're just in there looking at the stuff that's out. You're looking at the omote. There's other things that are in Tibetan representations very overtly, okay, that you will not find just out for sale in the Japanese shops. But they're there. You just have to know how to ask for them. So a lot of my lessons weren't about Mikyo. They were about learning how to navigate Mikyo in a Japanese context, or how to find things when I'm in Japan, right? And so my students know when we go to Japan, right? Touch on history, touch on a bunch of these things, but a lot of them are related to helping the student understand and orient their perception to things that they need to know or understand that the technique training and the Budo is dependent upon. It's Japanese Budo. It didn't develop in a vacuum. It was developed by people who weren't just immersed in a culture, they were part and parcel of the culture. So to understand it, maybe we need to learn more than Kamae striking and Seion, Tangeki, and Shiaku, or Koku, or Ichimoji no Kata. Okay? So, again, whether it was Chikai Sensei, Hatsumi Sensei, whatever, right? A lot of these things probably not the subject of that night's class. And these ancillary things, or even the moment that the whole group got chastised and whatnot, right? Maybe I was supposed to take those references rather than get defensive or ignore it, because that's not me. I'm very respectful. And figure out exactly what is it that I'm missing that this stuff is based on. Maybe he was giving me something I was supposed to go away or go home with and whatever and work on. Okay. So if I come home and just reproduce just what Hatsumi Sensei did and not everything he didn't do, or I come home and reproduce not only what he did and also everything he didn't do, understanding why or without understanding why, right? I might be copying or studying two different things. Okay? If I only take the physical demonstration and I haven't done the extra study that I, as a Western student, would need to be able to do to understand just in Japanese education, there is a huge expectation. There's a lot of stuff that we get in a Western education, or the delivery method, just very different. It's just automatically expected that the student knows that they have to go study that on their own. Teacher doesn't have to say it. Just like the difference in company, since I've made a couple of references tonight, company things. Let's say there's a brainstorming session, right? We're gonna have a brainstorming session. We're gonna come up with these ideas for like projects and moving things forward or whatever, right? So in my experience, that in a Western company, everybody gets together departmentally or whatever, right? Committee, and there's a brainstorming session. And then the last phase of the brainstorming session is, okay, Bob, you and your department, you're going to work on this part, right? And then Bill, you and and Trinity, you and your department are going to work on. Right? That doesn't happen at Toyota. That doesn't happen like Toyota Japan. It doesn't happen in Japanese corporations. Because as they're going down through the brainstorming thing and the project starts coming together, everybody in the meeting knows what their purview is. They know what their department's responsibility is. So they're taking notes on not just the whole thing, but line items on their stuff. So when the meeting's over, everybody just gets up and leaves. Westerners are like, what am I supposed to do? Like, who's responsible for what? But they already know. Nobody has to tell them what to do because that's been such a part of their educational response, right? So Hatsumi Sensei used to say, if you don't understand the basics, you need to get together with a teacher who can teach you them in a way so that you understand what I am doing. He stopped doing that. And I think he stopped doing it because there were so many Shidoshi and people that should have known them correctly that that's what they were going to be teaching new students coming into their training groups, and not just the new shit that they just learned in Japan, right? This stuff, and getting them to a level of proficiency, not just physically, but perceptually and understanding wise, that people should have been able to understand what he was doing. But what I was told by master teachers is it was obvious that that wasn't happening. But even so, Hatsumi Sensei stopped saying it. Why did he stop saying it? Not his responsibility to say it. The Shidoshi and the seniors should have known it. It's not his fault that the Western students weren't up to speed on what Japanese students automatically know. Because again, it's his assumption that if you don't know something that's important in the process, it's your job as the student to find that out. It's not a Japanese teacher's responsibility to spoon feed you like is done in a lot of Western academia. But come back to the West, and so some of us have to talk more because we have to give references, we have to give inferences, we have to point things out and develop drills and things like that so that a student can get up to speed on stuff that life never gave us before we walked in the dojo. Okay? So again, if I come home and reproduce not only what Sensei did, but everything he didn't do, that means I'm not practicing that. I'm not reproducing that, right? And again, without understanding why, I might actually be copying an omission rather than preserving a teaching method. And again, that's a very different thing. Okay, and I think this is really worth remembering. What wasn't taught isn't necessarily unimportant. And what wasn't explained isn't necessarily absent, right? It's not just because he didn't say it doesn't mean we don't have to learn it. Sometimes what Sensei didn't teach you may be exactly what Sensei expected you to go learn. Okay? Come back to that in just a little bit, but I got to zip through some of this. I already mentioned like the line drills, right? And people going, well, that's not Bujinkan, right? That's karate. We don't do that. No, you didn't do that at Hombu in the context of that kind of class. Okay? But I do this in my own classes, line drills, right? Everybody lines up. I call a technique or a kamae or whatever, and then, ichi, ni, san, whatever, right? Everybody moves together. Punch, kick, kamae, whatever we're doing. Okay? Again and again and again. Okay? And I've heard people, like I said, dismiss this. Right? It's an highly trained at Hombu. That's XYZ martial art, whatever. Okay? But again, what problem am I trying to solve? Not what am I making an official part of training? What problem am I trying to solve? Because I know something about many of my Western students, okay, that they don't like to confess. But it's obvious every time they come to class. And if they don't think that their teachers and seniors can see it, well, then they're doubly deluded. Okay? And that is they confuse class time with practice time. They come to class twice a week and think, I practiced twice this week. Maybe. But how many shuto did they actually do? How many times did you move into Ichimonji no Kamae? How many repetitions of front stomp kick, right? How many times did you work that particular ashi sabaki movement, right? How many clean, good, right? Uke nagash. Maybe we spent 15 minutes discussing something. Maybe you work with a partner, okay? Maybe I stopped you to make corrections. Maybe we changed sides. Maybe we moved onto another kata. At the end of an hour, maybe 90 minutes if you're in Shinobi Kai, right? You may have performed a particular fundamental movement, 8 times? 12 times? 20 times? That's not practice volume. And then you go home and don't do it again until Thursday, Friday, whatever. So I have a developmental problem. Not for my own training, for yours. You need repetitions. You're not getting them outside of class. Therefore, sometimes, everybody line up. Let's go. These belts are doing Ichimonji no Kamae. These are doing Hoko no Kamae. These are doing Kosei no Kamae. Okay, ready? Each sir, knee, sir. Again and again and again. Ichimonji no kata. Ready? On 1, we're going to Ichimonji with a quick nagash. On 2, weight shifts forward to the front leg. On 3, step at the rear leg, deliver shito. Again, again, again. Not because I discovered a secret densho that says thou shalt perform karate style line drills. That'd be pretty freaking funny though, wouldn't it? No, I'm doing it because repetition is required for the capability we're trying to develop. And my students aren't otherwise getting enough repetitions because I don't fucking practice enough outside of class. And it's painfully obvious when they come to class because they see class time as practice time. Class time is learning time. Again, my students went to Japan this last time. In Shrei Sensei class, what was his constant reminder? Don't worry if you can't do it today or this class or while you're here. Do your best. Take it back home and practice and figure it out and work it so that you, yes? Okay. So, and that's where we get to a distinction I think matters enormously, right? Preserving the art is not necessarily the same thing as copying the classroom activity. If sensei demonstrates Ichimonji no kata and expects me to go home and practice it 500 times, and I do that, but my students don't, then copying sensei's class exactly might actually produce less of the capability sensei expected. And shit, the Japanese teachers, they've been doing variations for years, not a standard core piece. So everybody comes home and practices each variation 10 times or less. How good are they at each of those variations? Maybe that's why Westerners think, well, you could do it this way, you could do it this way, you could do it this way, or whatever. But how many people are actually good at and can hit their mark on any one of those if their partner throws a straight punch, or this time he throws a hook punch, or this time he throws a big old whipping hook punch, or the hook punch comes in at a different angle from above or below, and they can still hit their mark because they know why. They know what produces it. I'm not knocking the students. This is about getting the shit off the curriculum or out of the scrolls or whatever and owning it. Huh? So think about that. Something that superficially, right, on the surface looks less Japanese, less like Hombu, less official Bujinkan, right? Everybody lined up doing repetitions, might actually be helping develop a prerequisite that the Japanese teaching environment simply assumes you will be doing. Because that's what the student's responsibility is. That's not licensed to invent whatever you want, right? And I want to be clear about that too, right? You can't say, well, Daishion Miller said curriculum is flexible, so I'm going to add whatever I like. No, you should be able to answer, what capability is this exercise developing? Why is this capability necessary? Why isn't the current training method developing enough of it? Why do I believe this intervention will help? How will I know whether it did? That is developmental logic. Right? And this brings us back to what we established at the beginning, right? The curriculum tells me, where are we going? Right? The lesson plan asks, what do these or any group of students, right, need today to move closer to that thing, right? And that word, these, matter, because not every student standing in front of me is necessarily starting at the same point either, right? Forget Japan versus America for a moment, because it's not about that, right? I've got different starting points inside my own dojo. Every single class. Every student is at a different starting point for that class. Maybe I've got somebody who's been here for 3 months, maybe somebody for 3 years, a Shodan, a Sandan, Mod 3, Mod 2, Mod 4, whatever, right? All standing in the same room. Do I teach all of them exactly the same thing? Maybe. Sometimes that's exactly what I want. But even then, are they necessarily supposed to be learning the same lesson from it? Right? And that's another place to look. I don't have a lot of time to go into all of these things, but that's another place, right? And my students know it, right? We're going to work on this technique. But Mod 1, I want you to get the steps down so that you have that, okay? Your big thing is distance and getting the kamae right, right? Mod 2, I want you working on this and paying attention to this part of it. Mod 3, Mod 4, right? Or I might go, right, if you're below Mod 3 or Mod 3 and below, you're working on this, and I want you looking for this particular thing. Mod 4 and above, it's this thing. Okay, everybody clear on what you're looking for and what your goal is? Yeah, okay, good. All right, now I'm going to correct from there. All right? So that's, again, there's different teaching methods, but each of those are about, right? Same map, different students, okay? It's all about turning curriculum into functional lessons that produce capability outcomes, okay? All right, so again, we just looked at a difference in starting point, right? Japanese student, Western student, whatever, okay? But again, I can walk into my own dojo, look around the room, and see students standing at very different places on the map, right? Not different places in the dojo. I mean, that's obvious, okay? I've got somebody who's been training for 3 months. I've got somebody who's been training for 3 years. I've got somebody that is super good at freaking Taekwondo and that style kicking. I've got somebody else over here that was in a Japanese form of martial arts since they were 12, and they're a powerhouse at these bladed, like, power back fists and stuff like that. I got somebody else that did a different martial art. I got somebody else that's never done more, right? So what am I supposed to teach? Okay. One answer is, and people do this, right, all the time, teach everybody the same thing. There's nothing automatically wrong with that. In fact, that's very much like some of the training experiences many of us have had in Japan. Whoever the teacher is, right? demonstrates, everybody works on it, beginner, intermediate, advanced, senior, whatever. Same demonstration, same kata or henka, right? Same room. But here's the question. Are they actually supposed to be learning the same thing? Are all the students supposed to be learning the same thing or looking for the same thing or correcting for the same thing? Okay. Same technique doesn't necessarily mean the same lesson. Okay. And again, we can go into examples and things, but I think you're getting the gist. Okay. Different developmental demand at different levels. Because at least in my curriculum, and Hatsumi Sensei looked at things the same way. He described these things in books and whatever, right? I look at a student's belt level, they think that belt color was for them. No, it's for me. I look at that, I should know what they've learned, what they should be proficient at based on what they learned, what they're working on, right? Lessons to be learned, lessons newly learned, that kind of stuff, right? What they might be reviewing or whatever, right? And what the next stage is, what the next step is. Capability, whatever, what lesson learned, whatever, okay? That's where I'm going to add from. And students know when they've slipped on an expectation. Because I have no problem looking at a student going, dude, you learned that in module 1. 1, not remembering it is unacceptable. 2, still looking like you're in mod 1 with the same technique after you've learned all these other things, also unacceptable. 3, what the hell? You learned that then. You should be way better with it by now. That part of the technique should be it should be non-negotiable. I should not be correcting you on something you learned 6 months or 2 years ago or 10 years ago. That's somebody who's not fulfilling on their responsibilities outside of class, between classes, because they see class as practice time. This is not going to the fucking gym and working out. Sorry, I digress. All right. So this is why, what are we teaching tonight, right? What are we learning tonight? It's not enough. Okay. When an instructor goes, oh, what am I going to teach tonight? Okay. It's a legitimate question, but it's not enough. I also need to ask, who am I teaching tonight? Where are they on the map? And this is not just for instructors. This is also for solo students or, oh, by the way, even if you're training in a dojo with a teacher, practice time outside of class, you're a solo student. You may not be a long distance solo student, but you're a solo student. Okay. So what do you practice and how do you practice in the teacher's absence? We're going to talk about that next episode. Okay. There are different ways to structure class, separate classes by level, all kinds of things, right? There's different ways to differentiate things, and those all matter. Okay. This is why it's again, my contention that like martial arts again is backwards in this whole other area as well, because there's no other area, no other pursuit that I can think of where people automatically assume that because you get a diploma or you get a belt color or whatever, right? So that's a sign of proficiency. Like I've learned these things and I can do those things. In no other realm other than the martial arts is there an assumption that that thing means that you're automatically qualified to teach. It doesn't mean you can't teach somebody something or whatever, but teaching skills, curriculum development, lesson plan development, staying on task, creating things or whatever, managing student development, all those kind of things, right? It's not motivation, right? But being able to get students around their own challenges and whatnot and move on, understanding that there's 4 different learning types. People don't choose them, right? Cerebral, visual, auditory, tactile. They all learn very differently. They can be looking at the same freaking technique, same demonstration, and they're processing it differently, right? That's why we have an instructor training program. So I can take people within my dojo or people outside the dojo who want to be good instructors and teach them the things that learning how to do onikudaki or ichimonji no kata or whatever, those are execution skill sets. They're not teaching skill sets. Right? Well, I'll just do it the way Sensei did it. Sensei's always said that he was a really lousy teacher. So, shit, where am I supposed to leave that? Okay. So, again, right, got to be careful. Okay. Is there a standard? Do we understand the standard? Do the students understand the standard? Right? Using past, present, future, right, to move a student backwards to help them develop in the present. Can I pull something from the future? Right? Not because I'm jumping them ahead, but can we do this so that a student goes, ah, shit. See, I thought this was good enough. It's not good enough. I can't do that, right? I can't do that technique because my current capability isn't good enough, right? So lots of different ways to proceed through these things, right? And again, sometimes the problem's bigger than one class, okay? So, and here's where curriculum design gets even more interesting, because sometimes I look at the starting points of the people who are coming into a training experience and realize I can't solve this appropriately inside the main class or inside a single class, right? And like this is, I have a current example for this, right? Our upcoming Fall Warrior Protector weekend intensive, right, what we used to call our fall camp, is going to focus on lessons from the sword. Not learning the sword, not lessons of the sword, lessons from the sword, right? And that wording is deliberate, right? Not merely, right? Okay. I want to use the sword as a teaching vehicle to explore principles that are universal, that transfer into virtually every other area of our training. Hanbo, unarmed, all that kind of stuff, right? But the sword gives me this really good way of doing it because the length and the leverage and things like that will expose things and highlight things and make them more obvious that where they might not be as obvious when we're training with other things, especially unarmed. Okay. But I've got a developmental problem because some people coming into that weekend may already have significant sword experience. Others may not have as much. Others may have none at all. So if I wait until the intensive begins and then spend the first several hours or sessions on how do you hold a sword? What are the sword kamae? How do you take totoku, right? Guard. How do you cut? How do you move? How do you draw and resheath the sword, right? What is sword etiquette in the dojo? Then we're not really doing lessons from the sword. How much of the weekend am I going to have to eat up doing that when what we're going to end up doing is spending valuable intensive time trying to get everybody to the frickin' starting line so that I can teach the lessons for that level. So what I did was I created a 4-week samurai sword primer, introduction to the samurai sword, introduction to katana, call it whatever you want, right? 4 weeks, 1 class each week. Some students will be in the dojo, some will be on virtually, right? And I deliberately did not make it a one-day seminar or a weekend seminar or whatever, right? Okay, it should be interesting to a lot of people because I'm doing several other weapon seminars around the same period. Okay, and those are single day, approximately 5-hour training experiences. I'm doing one on Kasari Fundo, followed by Tanto, followed by Shuriken, followed by Hanbo. And there's a very not I did a survey to see which one would start first, but coincidentally, they started at this point because it's about capabilities. It's about flexibility. It's about adaptability. And those weapons in that order are going to lead people from Omote to Ura when they might start out just thinking they're just learning 4 different weapons. But either way, right? I deliberately did not make sword or lay it out or schedule it the same way. So why sword different? Because the developmental objective is different. Okay. To most students, right? Okay, we're doing Kasari Fundo, Sunday the 30th from noon to 5. We're doing Tanto on a Saturday in September. We're doing sword 4 weeks, right? I don't merely need somebody to have seen the sword kamae. I don't just need to say, here's how to cut, and then check it off, right? I need students. Now, people can do that 4-week thing and not come to camp. Great. Here's an introduction to sword. I need people that are coming to camp to have enough time with each lesson to get the repetitions in. Okay? Week 1, they're going to learn a manageable amount, and then they're going to go away and they're going to work on it throughout the week between class 1 and class 2. If they wait until class 2 to get some more practice on that stuff is going to be shit at camp or the next time they pick up a sword, right? But either way, they're going to do that and then they're going to come back. Yeah? Okay. And now I can see what happened, what improved, what went wrong, what'd you misunderstand? So we can do a quick review. We can correct some of that. Okay. And then we add another layer. Students go away, get some more repetitions, the old stuff with the new stuff. They come back, we correct, we add, we practice, return. You get the idea, right? By the time we get to the fall intensive, my goal is that we're not spending the opening hours or day and a half or whatever, right? Trying to create basic familiarity with the tool. What I've done by laying out the sword course this way is deliberately raised the bar. I raised the starting point. And that's why I said earlier, sometimes the time between lessons is part of the curriculum, given that the student is doing what they're responsible for doing in the time between lessons. What I should not be hearing from students when I ask, right, you know this technique, right? And they go, well, I think I've seen it once. And what have you done with it since you learned it? Well, we didn't do it again in class, so I haven't had a chance to practice it. Good thing you're not Japanese. You'd probably be dismissed from class or shunned. You can come to class, just not going to teach until you get your shit together. Okay? As in teach, as in like I'm not giving you one-on-one correction. You've already gotten it. You just haven't done anything with it. Good thing we're Western, huh? Way too many expectations on Japanese students. Right? So again, what I did with this is a curriculum design decision, not just a scheduling decision. Could I put approximately the same instructional hours into one Saturday or over a weekend? Sure. Yeah. Would it necessarily produce the same developmental result? No. because exposure to the lessons is not the objective. Development is. The students coming to that seminar need to have worked with a sword enough with me, with other people, I don't care, so that we can jump into the principle level of training and not the mechanical step-by-step level of training. Okay. Now, of course, there's a big assumption, right, in what I just said. They go home and get repetitions. Yeah. Okay. We're going to have to talk about that. Not during this episode. Okay. Because I think there's an entire KUDEN episode hiding inside the difference between going to class, practicing, and actually training. And why life gets in the way of my training may not always mean what we think it means. But we'll save that, right? We're going to save that for next time. Okay. So again, the instructor's job isn't just to deliver content. Okay. It's to manage certain things, right? It's to give students what they need, and also to omit things that students need, but the student needs to fill in that responsibility, to fill in the spaces. Okay. And again, this all leads to capability. Okay. And a lot of this stuff is not primarily about how many martial arts techniques do I know, or how many am I teaching, or whatever, right? They're decisions about how people develop, how you and I develop, okay? As human beings. And that's another skill set entirely, right? And that raises an important question for anybody who's an instructor or who wants to become one. Who taught you how to make those decisions? Because knowing the curriculum doesn't automatically mean you know how to turn it into a class. Knowing how to perform the material, right? These techniques and skills doesn't automatically mean you know how to develop somebody else in it based on their learning style and all that kind of stuff, right? So again, right? That's why I have these different programs. Knowing the art's not the same as knowing how to develop a student. Right? So knowing how to do Ichimonji no Kamae, knowing how to do Omote Gyaku, right? How many weapons you've trained with, right? And we're not talking about that. We're not even talking about those as questions. Can you do Ichimonji no Kamae? Can you do perform, right? That's not what an instructor training program should be teaching people. Like, here's how we teach Ichimonji no Kata. Here's how we teach them. No. Okay? Everybody knows the techniques they know, right? We're not talking about those, right? We're talking about questions like, when does this student need another explanation? When do they need another 100 repetitions? What is this student's learning type? And what does that mean about how it's at best convey the instruction? Like, if somebody is a tactile learner, I can demonstrate a technique 15 frickin' times, and I will most likely still have to go over, watch them hit the wrong angle, and take their body and go, nope, over here. Now, feel the difference between you and them? Not see the difference. Feel the difference between you and them. Okay? Feel that space. Okay? Because they're a tactile learner. Okay? Some of my instructor peers are like, you talk too much. Yeah. Just demonstrate it and have them go work on it. Well, that's great for visual learners. Auditory cerebral learners need an explanation, need analogies, need a scientific. It's very different. To treat everybody as though they learned the same way is to only talk to, at best, 25 to 50% of the student body, and then be confused when people quit because they're not getting it. But again, questions like, when do I take them back and repair something, right? When do I let them struggle, right? When do I give them the answer? How do I pre-frame or reframe a lesson that is challenging? This is not an easy technique, but when you get it, you'll be able to. Okay? Right? How do I figure out where they are in their head about a certain topic? So when I bring it up, I can already address concerns or whatever that would make them not want to do it. Right? How do I modify lessons for people that are older, injured but still training, whatever? Okay? How do I use their life experiences as analogies to help them get a principle faster? When do I give them the answer? When do I deliberately not give them the answer? Right? When does the entire class need to work together? When do I split them apart? Right? How do I use different class configurations? I know they don't do that at home in Japan, but certain instructors do it at seminars. Certain instructors do it at their private dojo. I'm talking about Japanese instructors, right? Again, when do I correct? How much do I correct? How do I correct? How do I correct in a way that I can get around the natural human mind's tendency, ego's tendency to pop up a defense and get defensive or block things out or whatever when it's being corrected? How do I do that? Okay. We have a system called PCP. No, it's not a drug, right? That introduces the criticism after highlighting something else and then proceeding from there. Okay. This is a completely different skill set from the skills that we're teaching for self-defense. Okay. How do I make a correction in a way a student can actually receive, right? Those are teaching questions. Those are developmental questions, right? And here's the difference, right? The distinction I want to make. Being able to do something is not the same capability as being able to develop that capability in someone else. But somehow in the martial arts, we think that because we have a certain belt color, that automatically qualifies us, and everybody believes it, right? It's one of the biggest beliefs in the martial arts. Okay. That seems obvious when I say it out loud, but I'm not sure the martial arts world always behaves as though it's obvious, right? And that I think that's what's behind I want to get my black belt so I can teach. Well, okay. Go on the website, awma.com. That's Asian World of Martial Arts. Or go on century.com or tigerclaw.com, whatever. Buy a black belt. There you go. If a black belt, if having a black belt around your waist automatically qualifies you to teach, well, sensei, you know that's not what I meant. Yeah, no. But it's conditioning the way we believe and the way we operate. Permission to teach, somebody coming to us to learn a lesson, and the capability or capacity to teach are not necessarily the same thing. Just like knowing techniques and possessing self-protection capability against a unique stranger who is looking to wipe you from the face of the planet, not necessarily the same thing. Okay? And that's the exact distinction that we've been making throughout this series of episodes. Okay? The instructor needs a curriculum too. Okay? Now, if you're intuitive enough, of course, you could watch Sensei teach for enough years and eventually you'll figure it out. Okay? Can that work? Sure. People have learned that way for centuries. Observation, apprenticeship, helping in class, being corrected, teaching small pieces, all that kind of stuff. Right? But if we've identified capabilities that make someone a more effective instructor, why wouldn't we deliberately develop those capabilities too? Right? We do that everywhere else. Why we don't simply tell the student, stand around the dojo long enough and eventually you'll figure out uke nagashi. Right? We don't do that. We create exercises, we give feedback, we isolate problems, right? We provide repetitions, all that kind of stuff. So why wouldn't we apply that same logic, that same developmental logic to teaching? Well, anyway, so we'll talk about that a different time, okay? Because, just like Ichimonji is a skill, correction is a skill. Just like Momote Gyaku is a skill, right? Setting up a class structure that's conducive for who you have, rank level, whatever, right? How to frame a correction, right? That matters. It's a skill. Anyway, so James, what do we have? Questions, comments, complaints? Maybe James, is he still there? Oh, there he is. Ta-da! Look at that. Bing!
Actually, I don't see anything.
All right. Well, in that case, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. So, if you're on the email list, you probably have seen some of these things popping out already, even on the social platforms, right? Just finished fleshing out a whole bunch of training programs and whatnot for the coming year. If you're interested in the sword primer, that starts next month. If you're interested in the instructor training program, that information will be up in the next day or two, because the first half day workshop seminar session to kick that 16-week program off starts September 5th, 7th, something. It's a Saturday, first Saturday in September. So anyway, if you have questions, comments, you know how this stuff works, right? If there was a big aha moment during this one, put it in the comments, right? If you're on the audio only side of things, right? Like your Spotify or Apple Podcasts, whatever. You could always send comments and whatnot to warriorc@warrior-concepts-online.com. And we can go from there. I don't think we don't have an email address on the, oh, is that the right one? That's not the right one. That's the right one. Look at that. Okay. Don't send it to onlineninjaacademy.com. We rarely check those emails. Our general thing is warrior-concepts-online.com. And then if you're looking for info about something, it's info at. If you're sending it to me, it's jmmiller at. If just the general one, Warrior C at. And if you're looking for help with something and you're in a program, then it's generally support at. Right? So I think I got those right, James? Maybe, kind of. Okay, awesome. So if that's it, James, if you don't see anything else,
I do not.
Right. In that case, we will wrap this up, and I will talk to everybody again next time on KUDEN.